The Psychology of Religion, a spiritual history of psychology. Religion and psychology have an interconnected history. All spirituality and religions have a part in the ongoing human process of attempting to understanding the mind. Religion, like psychology, is a system of insight, prediction, and organization of the complexity of human life. The spiritual and psychological system is global in nature, yet from a common source. It can be assumed that the first thought of understanding human consciousness came long before recorded history, and perhaps before such a thought could be expressed in language or writing. The spiritual expression of this thought, as formed through religion, started the beginning of human inquiry into the world of psychology. Religion is a term that can be interchanged with spirituality, and sometimes philosophy. It is a way of life that leads to a conceptual view of how things are structured. Within this way of life there is ultimately a connection of psychological interest that has helped form the basis of what has become the study of human consciousness and behavior. The foundations of psychology can be recognized by reflecting on spiritual traditions. Animism is a broad category of beliefs among the first indigenous populations around the world that generally describe a veneration of spirits and nature as a living source. The elements of animism created a concept that spirits have power over the forces of nature, including human nature. Knowledge and insight into the human conscience came from dreams, including the concept of the immortal soul. The interpretation of dreams in animistic cultures was, therefore, the first analysis of the human psyche. Animism's attempt to describe spiritual forces affecting the physical world can be seen as the first attempts for describing human behavior as well. The concept of good and evil spirits, an archetype in religion, were correlated with health and behavioral problems. Winkelmann, 2004, believed that animistic practices were the first forms of neuropsychology, using spirits in place of what is now understood as processes within the brain. This not only explains a process in understanding, but also describes the evolutionary tendency of the human mind to create abstract concepts for what is unknown. Taoism is a likely descendant of animism. Its main principle is the all-encompassing force known as the Tao that maintains an eternal balance in the universe. Although often thought to have arisen in the time frame of Lao Tzu, the founder of philosophical Taoism, the origin of Taoism can be traced to the first civilizations of China over 4,700 years ago. Lin, 2006, explains that Lao Tzu refers to one of the first rulers of Chinese civilization, Hongdi, as a Taoist sage. In turn, there are historical accounts of Hongdi mentioning an even older ruler, Fu Shi, as the originator of the Taoist concept of the Bagua, used in the Book of Changes or the I Ching. Taoism's concepts could be seen as the framework for some of the most persisting concepts of the mind. The balance of the Tao coincides with the need for balance of the duality of the mind and body. The way of life prescribed by Taoism in concepts such as wu-wei, calmness, and accepting the cyclical nature of change, can also be seen as the first mental health advice. Lawson et al., 2007, explains the I Ching, originally a Taoist creation, as a manual that uses observation and causal processes to predict chance occurrences. The I Ching is an ancient equivalent of the scientific method and statistical analyses, both important to the development of psychology. Hinduism arose from one of the four river valley civilizations. The Vedic Indians of the northern Indus River Valley region created the Vedas, a book of contemplative knowledge that inspired a diverse system of beliefs and the Upanishad texts that Hinduism is based on. The ancient knowledge contained in these writings points to the origin of ideas that continue to have an impact on psychology. The comprehensive and transitory human experience, self-discovery, and interest in consciousness found in the Vedic texts are common inclusions of both the Eastern and Western psychological approach. Whether Vedic influence found its way to modern psychology, or whether the ideas of the collective unconscious are repeated in religions of all cultures is a philosophical question that may never be answered. What we do know is that the founder of Buddhism, a religion with concepts similar to practices in modern psychology, was at least partially influenced by Hinduism and its various sects. Buddhism is sometimes argued to be a philosophy instead of a religion because originally there was no worship of a higher power and its founder, Siddhartha Gautama, never claimed to be a deity. Even after being given the title of the Buddha, his status was that of an enlightened teacher. Through his philosophy of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, the Buddha discussed many psychological aspects that are part of what we continue to seek knowledge about in modern psychology. One of the most insightful aspects mentioned by De Silva, 1990, is the similarity between Buddhism's 12 modalities and cognitive psychology. The 12 modalities are an understanding of how 6 internal sense organs and 6 external objects are paired and lead to the formation of conscious perceptions. The Buddha taught that perceptions are vulnerable to distortions that affect one's behavior. In order to see reality, a person must free themselves from the control of their distorted perceptions and learn to objectively perceive the world around them. Along with a form of cognitive psychology and an understanding of how perceptions affect behavior, Buddhism expanded on other aspects including motivation, personal development, behavior modification, and consciousness. In this way, Buddhism has achieved an interaction with psychology that is both historically important and currently relevant. Although De Silva, 1990, sees no reason to desire a total integration of Buddhism with modern psychology, he supports the scientific inquiry of Buddhism's clearly testable hypotheses that may contribute to psychology. It seems that the Buddha was ahead of his time and was able to create a philosophy, and a way of life, that bordered on empirical observation. It is fitting, then, that empiricism became part of the last stage of the Four River Valley civilization through Greek philosophy. The ancient Greek civilization is known for its deeply rooted connection to mythology through a complex system of gods and goddesses. Their myths explain the causes of natural phenomenon in supernatural ways as many religions do. What connects Greek mythology to psychology is the insight of how tragedy affects emotions. In most Greek myths, unfortunate events lead the main characters down dark paths, forcing them to confront their emotions under tragic circumstances. These themes taught life lessons relating unhealthy behaviors to what Preeti and Myoto, 2005, describe as antecedents of destructive emotions and suicide. Understanding the events and behaviors that lead to tragic conclusions is ultimately helpful to others looking into the myth. The gods and goddesses either guide or hinder the individual's success or failure, much like personal thoughts and choices. This thought process may have inspired the transition to rationalism. Greek philosophy changed the paradigm of knowledge towards the principles of rationalism, naturalism, and empiricism. This knowledge advanced philosophical concepts that are at the roots of psychology. Socrates taught that knowledge, especially of oneself, was the source of opposing the evil that arises from ignorance. Knowledge of the mental life would result in behavior that advances society. His pupil, Plato, advanced the ideas of rationalism with the allegory of the cave. In this, Plato argues that observation must be augmented by rational thought in order to maintain personal and societal progress. Plato also believed in the soul as a part of the mind, and the mind as a three-part structure influenced by rational and non-rational forces. Plato's philosophy influenced the psychological theories of Aristotle, and eventually the future psychological elaborations of the human psyche. Greek philosophy is especially still entrenched in Western thought, including the predominant religion in the West, Christianity. The popularity of Christianity was catapulted by its acceptance of the Roman Empire, which once persecuted its believers. Because Roman society retained an influence from Greek philosophy, the elements of rationalism persisted into the Christian philosophical framework of the Apostle Paul. As Browning, 2011, also points out, the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle can be found throughout the Bible in the books of Ephesians, 1 Colossians, and the Gospel of John. Even later in the history of Christianity, St. Augustine would use Neoplatonism in his philosophical psychology of remembrance. Browning, 2011, calls this religious humanism, or a merger of various philosophical and religious ideals that strengthen the world community through interfaith dialogue. In summary, religious humanism can be an example to the science of psychology. In the same way religious and philosophical ideals can merge, psychology also has the potential to merge its ideas and strengthen global psychology. The interconnected history of religion is also the history of psychology. They are both part of the continued process of insight, prediction, and organization of human life. The inquiry into mental life began with religion, expanded with philosophy, and was and continues to be refined with science. These knowledge systems, global in nature, remain part of a common source, the abstract notions of the human mind attempting to understand its own existence.